Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, I'm recording with a new audio setup. Sorry for the audio last time. I sort of messed up and I was using my headset microphone instead of my dedicated microphone. I think the audio is better this way. So, hopefully, it's working better now. Please do let me know if you prefer the other one for any reason. Today, I'm going to be talking about foil cards. So, shiny cardboard. That's one of the things that's really interesting to paint because you can use different techniques to make it look cool and interesting. What I'm gonna show you are a couple of tips, tricks, and things you need to be aware of before you start trying this. It's really easy, really simple. Actually, it's one of the easiest methods I use, and it's basically stripping off the paint and making it look better than usual. So let's dig into it. First of all, gonna be using acrylics, same as before. Actually, I'm using the exact same wet palette. It's been a couple of days, had the lid on, and the paint is still moist. So be sure to check out my video on wet palettes to know how to keep your paints moist for longer periods of time so you can keep using them over and over again. Second, materials. Aside from the painting materials, what we're gonna be using are Q-tips. You can use Q-tips or any cotton or paper towel, whatever. I recommend this because these are easier to use and I can get rid of them as soon as they are dirty. The other part is nail polish. Actually, be careful with this because one, it's flammable, the fumes are toxic, so be very careful when you're working with this. Don't inhale it, and be sure to wear protection when you're working with this. The next step you need to be aware of is nail polish comes in multitude of forms. Usually, the one I recommend is 100% acetone. In this case, it's maximum strength. That's what's in here. Let me see if it says the contents. Yeah, basically 100% acetone. It says here. There are many nail polishes that have no acetone. In that case, that won't work. So be sure to find one with acetone because that's what removes the paint from a foil card. That's pretty much it for the materials. So that's what you need for altering foil cards. Now to show you and explain a bit of how the process looks like is these two cards in comparison. They are from the same set, different cards but from the same set, and I wanted to show you that you can remove the paint and make it look glossy, and there are many techniques you can use to make these happen and many ways you can use that glossy background to make paints. But before you get there, you need to understand that not all cards, even from the same game, here I have Magic the Gathering cards, not all cards are made the same. I have a little drawing here that will compare the layers. So what happens is when you have the card backing, which is the back of the card, it's painted, so it should be paint here on the bottom as well. Then you have a layer, that's the foil material. So this is paper, this is plastic, and then you have paint. When you have the card backing, foil, and paint on top, it's good to remove. That's because when you're rubbing off from the top to the bottom, you're rubbing off the paint layer and that exposes the foil back. So if I start rubbing off here, I will expose the foil part. In contrast, there are some editions, some cards, other products that work slightly different in the sense that they use foil, then paint, and then the card backing. In this case, when you start scrubbing from the top, you'll make it shiny, but you will not get to the paint. So you'll remain with this part. And it's tougher because when you start removing this layer and get to this layer, you start scratching basically the card backing. And you don't want that because it's too easy to damage the cards. And additionally, when you're removing the foil, it damages the card basically. So let's try to avoid that as much as possible. And if you're curious, this is the same reason why some cards bend. I don't know if you can see this one is bent slightly. and that's because of the materials. So the foil and the card backing, when you have these two, one absorbs moisture from the air, the other doesn't. So the card backing absorbs moisture, the foil backing does not, and that makes the cards curl up or down depending on the orientation of the materials, because the materials expand and contract with different temperatures, different levels of moisture. So when it's too dry, when it's too moist, when it's too dry, the back compacts. When it's too moist, the back expands. If it expands, it bends this way. If it contracts, it bends this way. So that's why some foil cards bend more easily, and they recommend like putting it in between like books to flatten them. But yeah, that's pretty much it, how it works and what we're gonna be doing. Now, basics before we begin with the paint removal. Give me a second. So when you're painting, for example, let me use this brush. This is still moist, so I don't need to put it that much. When you're painting on top of a foil card, you're gonna notice that it's kind of opaque. I'm gonna use more paint here. Let's do it. It's really opaque, and you'll start covering the paint on top. So instead of being shiny with a couple of layers, it won't be transparent and it won't look like shiny cardboard. So what I do recommend is, if you want to make colors that still look foil and don't cover the card by itself, I recommend using markers. So like the Copic markers. These are really cool when you try to make some paints and you want to use the foil and want to make it see-through, because these markers are more like water-based. They retain the shininess of the color and the card backing, so it will still be shiny and more homogeneous than this paint. So if I paint another layer here on top, it will become darker and darker with time. Here it's still moist, so I haven't painted the backing, but it's not as pretty as using other types of materials. So that's what the basics of foil painting looks like. Same as before, you just cover the art and start painting on top of that. It will be opaque unless you use a special marker or special paint. And because this is on top of plastic, be careful not to smudge it. It smudges easily, not the Copic, but there we go. That's an example of what you can do. Some people, what they do is they remove a specific part. For example, let me say right here, I want to make the moon be a different color. So what you do is a bit of acetone in the tip of the Q-tip, and you start scrubbing. Scrub. And what will happen is, as you can see, it's removing the paint. You can use a bit of force here, and it will generate that space over there. And then what you do is you come here, let it dry for a second, because it's acetone, and then you paint it over here, and you have something that still retains the shape, the shininess of the cardboard. Now let's move on to today's project. So today's project is gonna be a very simple one. What I'm gonna be doing is removing the paint from a specific area and painting everything else black. So that way we have a shiny piece of cardboard that looks cool, and it's really easy to make. Actually, anyone can make it really easily, and I'll show you how it looks. So I'm gonna make an island, and I'm gonna make the symbol pop up more. So I'm gonna go here, draw the general line. I'm using the same Q-tip as before. Don't want anything specific yet. We're gonna do that afterwards. I'm more comfortably doing this, and I don't need to check beforehand with another card, because again, I used a card to test from the same set, so I know that this works, and that's why I'm doing this. What happens is the acetone starts rubbing off the materials, So you'll end up with a dirty Q-tip, and when that happens, switch it up, get a new one, get a new cotton swab. Again, be careful with this material. There are many ways to block off where you're cleaning with the Q-tip or with the brush, whatever you're using, or the cotton swab. So one advice is use electrical tape to cover what you're not wishing to paint. In my case, I don't care because I'm gonna cover the rest of the card. You see, slowly but surely, I'm removing the paint layers. And then for cleanup, you can always use another cotton swab cleaner. So the more you rub it off, the more layers of paint you remove, and it becomes more evident. Once you get to the back, it's really easy to start scrubbing from the sides. Be careful not to apply too much pressure because that would generate dents in the card. So be careful with that. The good thing about this foil painting method is that because the card is covered with a foil layer, what happens is that you can use the acetone, not totally freely. Don't dump it on top of the card because that will damage the whole thing. But you can use it with more freedom just because it's plastic. It's not gonna absorb everything. Over here, removing these parts. Let's see. Does it look? Not quite yet. Let me remove some more. Some drops over there. It's fine. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a really basic art of the water symbol used for islands. And I'm just getting rid of the droplet shape. The rest I'm gonna paint so that it is covered. And the only thing that will be see-through is this layer. So now that I have planned the card where I want it to, I do one last pass to remove any excess material, just everything that's left on top of the card that could make it look not as pretty as we want it to. So this is just a cleanup step. Great! Now we have the basics of what we're gonna do. It's really simple, really easy, as you can see live here. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna be sketching what I want to paint. So let me put some moisture here. Here in this case, I'm not gonna add a layer behind it for the simple reason that I'm gonna paint it all in a single color. So I'm gonna be setting up here the outline for what I'm going to not paint here, and then you have a droplet reflection here on the bottom. That's it. That's pretty much what I'm gonna be painting. The rest of the card, you're gonna use this guideline and block off the paint everywhere else. Here I'm layer by layer adding color. What I can do here is, instead of doing this, actually that's one of the things I'm gonna be doing. Give me a second, I'll show you. First, I'm gonna make all these disappear basically, and one of the techniques you can use is use tape to cover the areas you don't want to paint. You can spray it on afterwards. In my case, I'm gonna paint it with a brush. So just take a flat brush that it's wider. I'm gonna mix the paint here a bit more and start covering with thin layers. So, and be patient, don't rush in. This is gonna take a while. Actually, let me show you. In this case, because I'm gonna reach the edges more easily, I'm gonna fix this card in place. So this way the card doesn't move around. What I'm gonna do, just painter's tape, grab a bit, roll it. There we go. We're gonna put it here. And what I'm gonna be doing actually, it's getting rid of one of these spots. Remember to cover your acetone afterwards, so you don't want to drop it all over your lap, desk, or whatever. Remember, toxic fumes. Keep a well-ventilated area. Also, these are really useful for cleanup. If you're painting and you have some rubbing alcohol, try to use it just to cover up the areas, clean up the areas afterwards. What I'm gonna be doing is using the technique I showed you before, guys. So I'm gonna be drawing the reflection in blue. So it's slightly off blue here, just a touch. So you can see the blue coming off just for an effect, so that it's gonna pop up more once everything else is painted. Now back to the painting of the card. Can just move everything over here. This first layer, it's just to add the color so that it fixes in place. Because this is plastic, this is too liquidy, I'm gonna need to blend it a bit more. Less water. But just very broad strokes. Use thin layers and take your time. So what you're gonna be doing is painting this. The first layer I'm adding is just to set up the base, and the paint will adhere more easily to the rest. So here it doesn't look like much, but like everything in life, with every step we take, we're making progress. We're not just doing this without purpose. We're doing it for a reason. And slowly but surely, it's gonna become what we want it to be. Again, because this is plastic, basically you're painting on top of, it's gonna be harder for the paint to stick. What you can do is basically start layer by layer, be careful to let it dry in between layers, and once it's dry, go over it again and again and again. It's a slow process, yes, but it's really simple, really straightforward. Here I'm painting on the edges, just to be sure that those edges are sharper. Again, there are other techniques you can use. For example, if I wanted to make these as fast as possible, I would use a stencil, which is basically a cut piece of material, and I would cover just the droplet, the island name, sprayed everything on top, and would call it a day. But we're gonna do it the more traditional way, and it's the slower way, but it's entertaining. Put a video in the background, you can do it alongside me, and just have fun painting, relax. Use this time to think of what your next steps are gonna be, what are they gonna look like, and how do you want the end result to look like. So you can add details. For example, I said like, okay, it's a perfect opportunity to use a light colored pencil. So yeah, take your time. This is gonna be up for a while, so I'm gonna accelerate the video now. Don't worry about it. It's just me painting black on different layers, like over and over again. You'll see what I mean later on. So enjoy the music. Okay, so those have been all the layers basically that I wanted to add, and I could be adding more just to make it more uniform. I think it's good enough for now. I don't want to keep adding more layers at this point. I could, you definitely could if you want to. I added about 5 layers of very thin paint just so it doesn't clump up really obviously. It's still gonna have bumps from paint just because, well, it's paint, you're still adding material, physical material covering the card. But by making it thin, you're trying to not add too much volume, too much unnecessary volume. So that's what you should focus on. Just try to maintain it as smooth as possible. And now what I'm doing is removing the borders, the edges. I don't want to keep, just to make the lines smoother, cleaner. I can remove a bit more here from the top, but it's fine like it is. And as you saw before, I only removed this part from the foil because I didn't need to remove anything else. So just to make my life easier, I knew I was gonna paint on this area, I didn't try to remove the whole card. You definitely can, actually I did a couple of those in the past. It's the same process, no much of a difference. It's just more acetone, more Q-tips, more material. But aside from that, it's pretty much the same. Here I'm removing what I don't want covered by paint. Just using the toothpick very lightly, covering this area. I don't want to scratch the card, so don't use too much force. And keep going through all the edges. Yes, final step. Go slow, take your time, don't rush. When I began doing this, I also rushed a bit. Not this one, but in my first attempts. And that made the card not look pretty, so lesson learned. I think the phrase is haste makes waste. Not necessarily magic. Haste is really good. But in life in general, sometimes when you're rushing over things, you tend to make more mistakes. So sometimes going slower is the right answer. Here you go. My fingertip, just slightly brush off everything. The details I want to pop out slightly over there. The final pass is just another Q-tip. This time I'm using isopropyl alcohol or water, whatever works better, but it's just to clean up a bit, make it more shiny. If you want to protect these cards and you want them to last for a long time, you have a couple of options when you're playing with these cards. One of the options is to basically use sleeves. Use double sleeves just to protect the card. The other option, which I also do recommend, but you need to be mindful of how it will affect the end look, is using a varnish. So using a varnish will make imperfections pop up more, but the varnish will cover the card and will maintain it for a longer period of time. So do use varnish if you want to. Depending on the varnish you use, opaque, matte, or glossy, you'll end up with different results. So pick the one you find best suited for what you're doing. I'm adding the droplet, which is the final part. I'm using a darker blue because I noticed it wasn't blue enough. What I could have done is just painted the whole thing with the light blue, but I wanted this color to stay like that. It's a pretty straightforward altar, just to make it shiny, make it look pretty, and it's something that you can do very easily. It took me a couple of minutes only, using a hair dryer to dry in between, just to make it something unique, something you made, and that you can show off during game nights. Or you can hang them in the wall like I have here. This is the one I made before. I leave it in very cheap small frames and put them around the house just because I had fun doing it. So yeah, thank you so much. That's a very simple foil altar for you guys. Let me know in the comments if you want to see something else, if you want me to try something new, and leave a comment, subscribe, like the video if possible. Thank you so much. See you next time.